During the rise of Christianity in the 1st century CE, new scriptures were written in Koine Greek. Christians eventually called these new scriptures the New Testament, and began referring to the Septuagint as the Old Testament. The New Testament has been preserved in more manuscripts than any other ancient work. Most early Christian copyists were not trained scribes. Many copies of the Gospels and Paul's letters were made by individual Christians over a relatively short period of time very soon after the originals were written. There is evidence in the Synoptic Gospels, in the writings of the early Church Fathers, from Marcion, and in the Didache that Christian documents were in circulation before the end of the 1st century. Paul's letters were circulated during his lifetime, and his death is thought to have occurred before 68 during Nero's reign. Early Christians transported these writings around the empire, translating them into Old Syriac, Coptic, Ethiopic, and Latin, among other languages. Bart Ehrman explains how these multiple texts later became grouped by scholars into categories. During the early centuries of the Church, Christian texts were copied in whatever location they were written or taken to. Since texts were copied locally, it is no surprise that different localities developed different kinds of textual tradition. That is to say, the manuscripts in Rome had many of the same errors, because they were for the most part in-house documents, copied from one another. They were not influenced much by manuscripts being copied in Palestine, and those in Palestine took on their own characteristics, which were not the same as those found in a place like Alexandria, Egypt. Moreover, in the early centuries of the Church, some locales had better scribes than others. Modern scholars have come to recognize that the scribes in Alexandria, which was a major intellectual center in the ancient world, were particularly scrupulous, even in these early centuries, and that there, in Alexandria, a very pure form of the text of the early Christian writings was preserved, decade after decade, by dedicated and relatively skilled Christian scribes. These differing histories produced what modern scholars refer to as recognizable text types. The four most commonly recognized are Alexandrian, Western, Caesarean, and Byzantine. The list of books included in the Catholic Bible was established as canon by the Council of Rome in 382, followed by those of Hippo in 393 and Carthage in 397. Between 385 and 405 CE, the early Christian Church translated its canon into Vulgar Latin, the common Latin spoken by ordinary people, a translation known as the Vulgate. Since then, Catholic Christians have held ecumenical councils to standardize their biblical canon. The Council of Trent, 1545–63,